Good evening, everyone. I declare the agenda briefing forum of the 20th of May 2025 held in Council Chambers at Level 2, 388 Hay Street, Subiaco, open at 5:32 p.m. Welcome councillors, staff, members of the public. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area, and we recognise their cultural connection to our land and waterways here in Subiaco. I'll take attendances now. We've got Councillor Johnston on leave of absence. Councillor Kosovic, I assume, is on approved leave of absence as well. Welcome to all the councillors, the remaining councillors who are present here in person. Most of the executive leadership team is here. Welcome CEO and Director Corporate Services, Business Improvement and Development Services. We've also got an Acting Director of Technical Services in Randir Karma. Welcome to you. And we'll deal with any leave of absence requests at the OCM next week. Okay, disclosures. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening, councillors? Nope. Good. Okay, there's no approved deputations, and I think I'll save any announcements to next week, so we'll move straight into the officer reports. First up, C1, 6 Redfern Street, Subiaco, a proposed change of use to short-term rental accommodation. Any questions on C1, councillors? Councillor Burns.
Excuse me. Again, thank you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, I do have some questions, but they address, there'd be similar questions across the board for C1 and C2, if that's okay, because they're general in nature. So, as you see fit, my first question would be, were either of the properties during the advertising period advertised across the lanes? So in the position with regards to Redfern, I'm talking the lane which would be what we'd consider a natural lane, I suppose for a better word, at the rear of the property to the owner on the street behind. In the case of Darbon, it would be Metta's Lane because the properties behind 19 Darborn, across Metta's Lane, directly relate to the only outdoor living spaces for properties that would be, their mailing address would be Centro Avenue. So did we advertise? I know we go across streets and adjoining landowners, but in both cases, the properties I'm talking about would be closer to the application than the others. There's my first question. Thank you.
Director of Development Services, are you best placed to answer these?
Yeah. Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the answer is yes, and a really easy way to see it in both of these reports is if you have a look at the conditions for the management plan, it lists a number of properties. So they were the properties that were directly informed in advertising, and that's how we actually selected those properties for the management plan because it was consistent with our consultation policy. So yes, for both reports, you can see the properties advertised to in condition 3 for both.
Just in that you're saying they were a part of the original of the first advertisement?
That's correct, yes.
If I can carry on. Sorry. Okay, I might need to skip back. Something just skipped my mind. My next question would be, Mayor McMullen, is the city aware of, with regard to short stay accommodation, what is taking place in Europe as a whole and what has happened in the last 24 hours in Spain?
Mr. Petrowski.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. When I get the chance to read the news, I understood that there are something's going on in Barcelona at the moment. And yes, we are generally aware of things that are happening across the globe However, that wouldn't have factored into our consideration as it's not one of the things that we consider under the planning framework.
Can proceed. Look, on that matter, I'd ask you to comment on what's taking place with regards to Europe. Cities like Edinburgh, Dublin, have been devastated. They openly adopted short stay accommodation, thinking it was a panacea, and are now winding it back because it's turned out to be a city killer. With regards to Spain, in the last 24 hours, the Spanish government.
Okay, Councillor Burns, we can all read the news between now and next week. Our planning staff are being asked. No, our planning staff are being asked to make an assessment under LPS 5, which doesn't apply in Spain nor the rest of the EU. So I don't think that's a relevant question to next week's decision.
I don't want to have it up, but if I could just,
try and make it as relevant as you can. Without a commentary on the international news, please.
Then it will be relevant, all right, because I'll move on to my next point. But it's relevant in the sense that in Spain, the last 24 hours, 64,935 properties on the Spanish platform of Airbnb had their licenses withdrawn. Okay. Now, where that's relevant is Airbnb's position was that they would appeal it because they didn't think it was any of the Spanish government's business. So I'm talking about the attitude, of the main company on this planet that runs these platforms. Short stay is commonly referred to.
Councillor Burns, Airbnb is not an applicant. They're not providing us advice. What do you want our planning staff to comment on in response to your question?
The attitude of Airbnb.
That's a difficult question for anyone in this room to comment on.
It is raised in the email to Councillor Johnston. It talks about complaining to the host company.
Mr. Petrovsky, to the extent it's relevant to the planning assessment, what can you tell us about Airbnb, which is one of several short-term rental accommodation administrators in Australia?
Sorry.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, that's a platform for short-term rental accommodation, so I can't comment on that provider. What I can say is that there was an email that I did send to all councillors actually, and it talked about if there are to be any issues, complaints need to be made to an operator. Now that operator is someone who's listed in the management plan as a person who would be looking after that property, not to the platform that property is being leased out through itself.
Councillor Burns, any further questions?
Yes, several. Thank you again, Mayor McMullen. I just referred to an email that went to Councillor Johnston directly, but it seems sent to all councillors. And it states that it was a question regarding to the complaint process. And I see that, and I'll just grab sound bites from it, that short stay, the instance we encourage neighbours to speak directly with the operator. This is with regard to complaint. So they want them to speak to the operator, which I'm going to presume is either the person that's acting as a go-between between the owner and the platform, be it Airbnb or anybody else, as the action complaint is quicker. Which I have doubt about, but sometimes aren't aware, and sometimes aren't aware, so the city's not aware. We can't compel the community to lodge noise complaints, that's fine, but we are most likely to go directly, these people are most likely to go direct to the police because it's night time, all right, because we're not open at night time. So I'm just looking at the fact, am I right in that part of the question? That once our doors are closed and something's going wrong for neighbours on something we've approved, that we are not available to deal on it.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So thanks. That email is intended to be read in general. So what that means is that if there's an issue going on in any property, or that might be an issue that the city might need to attend to, we're obviously only open certain times. We do have after hours as well. So whether it's a short-term property or a residential property or just a normal residential property, if there is an issue that needs a certain police matter, it doesn't really matter whether it's STRA or not. People can contact the police, but obviously they can contact the city as well through the after-hour services if we are available, and or during normal times. So the whole premise of that email is to say that we could receive any number of complaints on any type of dwelling, property, commercial, residential, be it whatever it might be acting as. If there are complaints, and what we're talking about in STRA is having a management plan. So sometimes someone who might be looking after that property as a property manager or operator might be able to intervene quite quickly. So the condition that we've recommended is that management plan be provided to neighbouring residences, so they actually do have the details of the operator, and if there's something occurring on site, they would be best placed to be able to deal with it through an STRA approval. Now, if there wasn't an STRA approval, for example, those details wouldn't be there.
If I may, in the same email, and should be very brief, this part of my questioning, you refer to tourism, and families like to travel. And I read, in the case of a mum, dad, 2 kids, and the grandparents. Okay, so there's your happy family. That sounds great. But it later talks about there are obviously other accommodation opportunities for people other than that. So what would be in your mind, what would be the polar opposite of mum, dad, 2 kids, and the grandparents having a nice vacation?
I don't understand the question, so I can't really put that to Director of Technical Services. What do you mean by the polar opposite?
Basically, 6 18-year-old boys renting a house out for 2 nights to go.
Okay, so we're talking about
I've answered my own question. How about we leave it at that?
Okay, well, if you've answered your own question, then I'm happy with that
we'll
too.
get into the good stuff anyway, so you'll be happy. All right, getting back to direct planning matters. Mayor McMullen, if I could have an answer to the city's understanding of SAT decisions with regard to interpretations of amenity and the short stay accommodations.
Mr. Petrosky, is that something you can answer?
Very broad.
Yeah.
I'll allude to it, okay?
The city's understanding, if you can narrow the question a bit, Councillor Burns.
All right, okay, I'll do that for you. Thank you, Member Mullen. It's my intention, first of all, I will be lodging alternatives to refuse both of these applications, and as part of it, I'll cite, for instance, as one example, first of all, I'll tell you, the State Administration Tribunal clearly supports their position. This is that there's an interruption to amenity to localities by short stay accommodation. As a proper planning reason for it, so it's a proper planning reason for refusal. By way of one such example, 2022 WASAT 36 Lawrence versus the City of Rockingham. SAT member Ross Povey, who most of us would be aware of, right as part of his decision to dismiss the appeal, and I'll read you the wording. It is therefore reasonable to expect. It's a question. It is therefore reasonable.
Sorry, the people on the left, I've got this under control. Councillor Burns is taking some licence. I think he's going to get to a question. And Councillor Burns, I'd urge you to get to your question because you're going to have 5 minutes to debate next week, just like everyone else. And clearly, it's losing its impact the longer you go on asking these questions that take a long time to get to the end.
Well, if I don't know
Sure, I'm just trying to help you to help me and to bring us all along together.
I'm trying to work out in the recommendation for an approval.
Yep. Okay. So your question,
being taken into consideration.
Your question was, what is the city's understanding of the SAT's position on impacts of amenity?
I'm now going to read to you.
And now you're quoting past SAT decisions.
No, I'm going to read to you just a brief part of the decision on what it is. Okay.
Keep it brief, simple. And then we'll see if the staff are in a position to provide a comment in relation to the SAT decisions.
It is a single sentence. This is Ross Povey with regard to WASAT 36 2022. It is therefore reasonable to expect that visitors and short-term occupants of the site in question of the appeal, of the site would use the outdoor entertaining area more intensely and at more unpredictable hours than if the property were being resided in on a permanent basis, thus resulting in more noise, more disturbance to neighbours. So SAT's position is...
Okay, Councillor Burns, if you're an expert on SAT, you'd know that each case turns on its own facts. There's no rule of precedence in SAT, so that was a comment that was made in relation to that particular application. What is the question that you would like our staff to answer in relation to agenda item C1 for next week? What is the question?
Okay. Have the officers, in recommending approval, taken into consideration, and by the way, it's not a single comment, all the SAT decisions on these matters have the same basis. They find it an intensification and a reduction of...
What is the question, Councillor Burns?
Are the staff aware of WASAT 36, okay, and other things? They're all listed in the... Look, I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll just leave this. If they want to say yes or no, but what I'm going to do...
It's really hard to say yes or no to any of that, but look, let's package it up really easily for them. Director Development Services, are your staff aware of the decisions that come through SAT on STRA and other planning and development stream matters?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Matt. Yes, we do receive the SAT decisions database, and we review cases from time to time. Yes, we are aware of this matter, the one that you mentioned, Rockingham. Yep.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen, and through you. Although this matter before us is a planning matter, the operator has to adhere to a management plan that my reading of it says has to be adhered to at all times to the satisfaction of the City of Subiaco. So how will or can the City monitor the operator adhering to the plan? Bearing in mind not all of those things are planning matters.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So management plans and conditions that are attached to developments and their approval require the use of the land in a certain way. We wouldn't be actively monitoring that plan to make sure that people are checking in or checking out at a reasonable time. However, what that does is provides the city an avenue to consider any other complaints that do come in through the use of that property. So then we actually do have a basis to provide a recommendation or to undertake planning action through compliance measures if through an investigation we found that the management plan is not being adhered to.
Follow-up question, if I may. So the onus would be on neighbours and the community to gather evidence and then report any concerns to the city. Correct.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. They wouldn't necessarily need to gather substantial evidence if there is a general complaint that comes through. Sometimes it's just an email or information, and then the city undertakes that investigation. So we're not asking people to go out of their way, but that occurs across any matter, whether it's got approval of or not, in a planning sense.
follow up, if I may, through you, Mayor McMullen. Sure, I understand that, but bearing in mind this is short stay accommodation, the people who have caused the problem may well be long gone back to wherever before the city can actually come and gather any evidence.
Thank you. That is correct. So they could be gone. In the management plans that we have, they are looking at installing noise monitoring devices as well. So the onus would then be on the operator to ensure that if those, if that noise is exceeding a certain level, and if there's consistent breaches of that, then there might be a case to be able to undertake compliance action and seek for that operator to lose their registration through the SDRA regulations.
Follow-up question through you, Matt McMullen. Is the data about noise limits being exceeded stored for a particular length of time? And how would the city go about retrieving noise monitoring data, should it be stored, if, for example, neighbours are coming and saying consistently we've got problems with noise? How do we get that data if it's even stored? Because there's nothing in that in the management plan.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, we could request that that information through the management plan, and that's a good point on how long that data is going to be stored for. There are other ways that the city can investigate noise complaints. So sometimes that can occur on the spot if the city is around, noting that it can be difficult out of office times. However, if there is a persistent complaint, the city can go and undertake investigations at random days and at random times, and we have done this before with other management plans. It is a level of protection that wouldn't apply to properties that don't have a management plan, for example.
Councillor White.
Thank you. Maybe, if I might, just a quick follow-up to that. Has the city ever revoked authority from an approval such as this because the management plan hasn't been adhered to?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Not for a short-term rental application that I have seen. In the past 5 years, short-term rentals have been occurring in the city without the need to actually have approval.
Okay, thank you. My question was mainly just to try and square off two bits of information. In the staff report, the issue of the complaints regarding parking was raised, and the response to the issue of the concern raised about parking is that, well, there's a two-car parking in the garage at the back. In addition, the city allows them to park, 2 more cars can be parked on the verge. In their proposed management plan, they say all vehicles must be parked in the garage and nowhere else. So I'm not too sure how to square that, because what the staff document's saying is, in fact, there's 4 bays. In what the proposal is saying, there's actually only 2.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So our assessment of the proposal is that the 2 off-street bays in the garage are sufficient for that premises, and that would match what you would normally require for a resi dwelling.
May I follow up? Yeah, sure, I get that. But I guess the problem, what I'm saying is, as we're responding to a complaint from the community, we're saying, it's actually fine, there are 4 bays available, when there's not.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, that would depend on the nature of the complaint. So if there are, we wouldn't be necessarily responding to say there are 2 or 4 or 5 cars available. I don't know what the question.
Sorry, man, can I just clarify? I don't mean a complaint in general. I mean the complaint raised by the DA, by the process, has said they're concerned there's not enough parking. And the city's response, the officer's response to that has been, well, actually there's 4 bays. But in fact, even by the management proposal plan that's proposed, there's only 2.
Yep. Thank you, and through you, Matt. And what we feel is that 2 bays are sufficient in any event. So an assessment was undertaken that there's 2 bays in a garage, and that's what you would have under the R codes for that size of dwelling. So we find that that's likely to be sufficient for a short-term rental, noting that while some people might have a car, if people are coming on holidays, they might not have vehicles as well. So we're saying that two bays is enough, and there are verge parking in and around the area that may be used.
Yeah, thanks, Director. That's helpful. Could I ask whether the staff would consider revising this part of this? Because, as I say, the problem is, I agree, the assessment that you've made is that 2 is enough. But if the community is saying we're worried it's not enough, and in fact what we're responding to is now saying, oh, there's actually 4, but the people who are using the property are not allowed to use 4, it just doesn't seem like a proper representation of what's being presented.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. There is a general condition that allows for management plans to be updated to the satisfaction of the city. But that is feedback that we can provide those operators in any event if they'd like to update the management plan.
I'm sorry to back and forth. I'm not asking to change the management plan. I'm asking that the officer's report for next week be changed, given that's what we're going to be discussing and voting on, because the officer's report, this one, says there are actually 4 bays available when there's not.
Okay, thank you. I understand now. Yep, we'll have a look and update the report as needed.
Thanks, Councillor White. No more questions from you? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to go through the overall process. If we do approve this DA, then there's a land use change. And now STRA. If things go awry, the best we can do is under Section 29 is issue a certificate recommending, it says cancellation or suspension of the STRA. Is that revocation of the DA, or is this a registration of the operator, or what exactly is being cancelled? Would the DA then revert to a non-STRA one?
Thank you, and through the Mayor, it won't revoke the development application, but to be able to run the STRA, you need both a development application and registration. So it will revoke the registration from the relevant DEMO's website. So it won't revoke the development approval. Because there are separate legislation as planning legislation, we can't actually then go into what that other approval has through the STRA registration that you have. No, so we're approving the land use on this site. We're not actually approving the individual operator, which go through a separate process. And I think the acting manager has a bit more information on the Section 29 process.
Through you, Mayor. So essentially the way it works is we grant a planning approval under the Planning and Development Act. So separate to that, under the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act is a requirement for that premises to register with DMES. So that, as part of that registration process, they need to ensure they have valid planning approval if required. So if, for whatever reason, the registration was cancelled or suspended, the planning approval would still run with the land, but they couldn't operate it because they don't have a registered premises to run the short stay accommodations. So effectively, they can't actually operate it. And when we've been advised by DMERS that if their registration is cancelled or suspended, they can't actually advertise their bookings on the booking platforms, so they're automatically taken offline. So while they still may have a planning approval in place, they can't actually operate it as a short stay accommodation.
Thank you. I'm also interested in what happens down the road. Is this property, once it has that altered land use, is it still available to be used as normal residential property if somebody wants to sell it, or is it locked into being STRA indefinitely?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor. No, so it can very easily revert back to a normal residential property. So it's a fair use. It wouldn't need a planning application, and there'll be no changes under the building legislation because it will remain the same class of building. So essentially it can revert back without any red tape requirements.
So it can revert back, but it can still be used by future owners as STRA, assuming they get the DMERS registration as well.
That's correct.
I might just jump in. So by revert, you can switch between operating in a long-term unhosted Airbnb and then live in it for the rest of the year. Is that what it means to revert without any approval? You'd need. It would be a streamlined process back to an approved use as a residential dwelling, wouldn't it?
Yes, thank you. So while you'd still be able to use it as an STRA dwelling, so for example, it's used as a short-term dwelling, it then goes back to residential. My understanding is that it can then go back to a short-term rental use because it's got that approval, subject to the management plan and the conditions which run with that land. Because the conditions which run with the land would then they don't. Well, they essentially run with the land. So I've said that, and that would likely require updating if there was going to be a new landowner or a new operator, as those people will have changed. So there would be some technicalities to go back to the short-term land use because the management would have changed, but otherwise it's interchangeable with a normal residential house.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. Look, many of the questions that I was interested in compliance, I think, have now been asked. But the register is going to be kept by Consumer Protection. Will Consumer Protection have any part in monitoring compliance?
Is that one for the acting manager?
Through you, Mayor. So in discussions with DMERS, a large part of the responsibility does fall on the local government, particularly in responding to complaints. So we do have the ability to issue a Section 29 certificate under the STRA Act. And as part of that process, we do need to provide reasonable opportunity to the operator to rectify any concerns or issues that have been raised through complaints. If they fail to rectify those issues, then we can either recommend cancellation or suspension to DMERS. And following that, that matter is considered by the Commissioner for DMERS, and they can make a determination to suspend or cancel it. So at present, there hasn't been a STRA that's been presented to the Commissioner as of yet. So it is a new process, but that's effectively the steps that would be involved in compliance.
So I think as has been mentioned, the people generally, the guests who are going to be in these STRAs are transient, they're short term. So how are we going to manage compliance with people who are, only here for a short period of time? It just seems to be quite a difficult process. Could you tell me how you're going to do it? And secondly, it said that it's not going to take any more resources of council, I think. But if we're responsible for compliance, isn't that going to take resources?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So we're responsible with compliance generally, whether something is approved or not approved. If there's a complaint, we need to investigate. So the resource considerations are there whether this application has been made or not. The compliance is not. The compliance will be with the landowner and the operator of the site in this instance, so not necessarily with the people who might be there or who may have left. So we'd be looking at the operator and landowner to ensure that people who they are actually putting into the to the premises have been reviewed. There are websites and availability to do that, and to make sure that if noise monitoring devices are being installed, that they're being looked at, they're being monitored, and demonstration of how they're going to be acting. So it is with the owner and operator, not necessarily with the people who may have come and gone. But there is, even in a commercial sense, a review system of owners and operators through platforms reviewing the star ratings of people who are actually going in their premises. So we feel that the industry essentially starts to regulate itself. These have been operating in Subiaco for 5 years with limited to no complaints received by the city.
Okay, sorry, I'd like to move on to something that's possibly a little bit different. I was taking a look at the Hansard for this legislation for the SRAs, and essentially it says that this is about moving a commercial into a residential area. You're moving a business into a residential area. Now, is there any change in the zonings or permitted use of land with that? I mean, if you're running a small hotel or you're running another business, childcare, whatever, you normally have to get permission, for a change of use. Is there no change of use? Is this just going to be commercial business can now run in residential areas? Sorry.
What you're considering is the change of use development application. So whether someone is renting out a property on a short-term basis or on a long-term basis through a normal tenancy agreement, that might have commercial implications for those people. But this is a land use change that you're asking that we have presented to council. So it's a development application, and this is what is being presented.
Councillor Jones.
Well, one quick one. Is the potential loss of amenity a valid planning ground for refusing such an application?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it is.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to complaints. In relation to the property at 6 Redfern, it's been operating for a while, and the report notes that we haven't had any complaints, and yet we obviously have concerns raised from residents who perhaps didn't know that it was a short stay premises. And I guess I'm thinking on my feet here, and I'm not quite sure what I want to ask, but it's really around the issue of how often do we get complaints in residential areas anyway, yes, where people are just, permanent residents. I guess that's what I'm going for. Because I guess I'm wondering whether, and it's just speculation, whether the comments that have come in may not have been raised previously because they felt that they were their neighbours and they were residents, and you just try and rub along with the people in your street. Now that they're aware that they're short stays, they're more inclined to complain. I'm not quite sure what my question was there. I apologise. I guess I'm trying to determine how often people complain about their neighbours in general terms. I realise you won't be able to have any kind of specific figures.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes, people do complain about things all the time, and it's just general human nature. So some complaints might be of a general kind of nature of, hey, I think something might be going on, just letting you know, and some may be more direct. So there's always an investigation that occurs. From our experience over the past 5 years, the use of short-term rental accommodations have generally seamlessly fitted within the community. And there's been no discernible difference in the way that these houses have actually been used on a Subi scale that has pointed us to any significant issues of amenity that come out from STRAs. So generally, Subiaco, where it's located, these STRAs might be of a premium, of a premium offering, and the types of people that they're attracting, they might be for small tourism purposes or business purposes in and around. So I've in my past few years here experienced significantly more complaints from a general residential nature. I actually can't off the top of my head think about any complaints from STRA users in recent history, and perhaps Brendan can elaborate on that. He's closer to the fire than me.
Through you, Mayor. So, typical complaints that we get in planning services, at least, ordinarily relate to building work, so construction activities, and it's generally quite obvious and to neighbours, particularly with noise and tradespeople coming and going through properties. But in relation to STRA, planning services receives very few complaints annually. We've also spoken to our rangers and environmental health services, and they've reported the same as well. Annually, they receive a very low volume of complaints relating to STRA.
Perhaps if I may just try and clarify what I was trying to get at. I guess what I'm wondering is, now that people may not have been aware that there was a short stay accommodation in their street, now they are aware and they feel more able to raise their concerns than they would have when they thought that it may have been a resident.
Thank you for your question. I agree with that sentiment. People are aware so they can raise issues. Yeah.
Councillor White.
Yeah, sorry, it actually relates to both, the coming matter as well, but and maybe a bit related to this. I know we're not, for good reason, we don't know where the people who have raised concerns about the application live. But it strikes me that what we're seeing in a lot of the comments are the immediate neighbours of any proposal, and they're the ones that bear the brunt of the comings and goings and the parking issues and these kind of things. Again, we can't identify where people are, but I'm just saying, would that be a reasonable assumption?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah, generally the objections in these instances would be from the immediate locality next to or on the same street, for example.
Councillor De Vries.
Just a quick one through you, Mayor. This is just relating to the fact that we now have a management order. So sort of a follow-up from Councillor O'Connor's question, which is, now that there are sort of control mechanisms and much more transparent things that can be done, is it perhaps likely that there will be more complaints because there are more specific guidelines, but also more protection? And obviously, second part of the question is, isn't this going to be an improvement on what currently exists, which is nothing to be able to control except for the normal sort of norms, but is it in fact going to be better? Thank you.
2 questions, Director of Development Services.
Thank you. So what we've recommended is that the management plan be kept up to date made available and then provided to the surrounding residents as well. So they actually do have an understanding of who they can contact and all the rules of that STRA. That's much more than what we would have in the current situation, where short stay accommodation has been a permissible use, hasn't had to have any approval, and have continued to operate in 5 years. So it is a step change, and we're making sure that in recommending approval, the local neighbours do actually have the information available to them.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. If this does get approved, what capacity would we have to vary the management order subsequent to any approval of the DA?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, we wouldn't necessarily go in and vary the management plan. It would be on an application from the applicant or the person who's put that in. So if there are issues with the management plan as it's approved, there can be some changes. So those changes would be more administrative, that the operator's name and contact details and all those sorts of things are updated. But if any changes to the management plan actually relate to the land use changes, then that would need to be an amendment to the development application itself. So it would have to be an application to the DA change. But we have included provision to say that, well, if new operator changes or if there is to be a change of personnel, we would update, the applicant would need to update that information, provide it to us, and then also provide an updated copy to the properties listed in the condition.
I'm really thinking more along the lines of complaints coming in about behaviours there that aren't currently covered by the management plan, and whether we could vary it to add additional controls.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'll have to take that one on notice, because I don't believe we could go in and vary the management plan.
Okay, I will take the opportunity to ask a question. It relates to two objectives of the residential zone, objectives A and C. I'm just wondering, Mr. Petrovski, if you can help us make a decision next week. My issue is this: the first objective at objective A is to provide a range of housing at a range of residential densities. To me, that makes sense. That's probably going to be the main purpose of any residential zone anywhere. It's to provide housing. But then there's this kind of way to sidestep that at Part C, that you can also have in this type of zone a range of non-residential uses, as long as they're compatible with and complementary to the residential development. So I understand that too, but to my mind, you've either got housing or you've got other things that are compatible with housing. How should we conceptualise short-term rental accommodation? Is it housing, or is it a non-residential use which isn't housing, but it complements housing and it doesn't impact housing if the right controls are in place? I don't see that you can have it both ways.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, it's actually quite interesting that given what's gone on in Perth recently with the shortages of housing, STRAs have actually been used in some instances to provide people with temporary housing where they actually don't have any other choice. So that's in an interesting way complying with Objective A of the objectives of the residential zone. When we are considering Objective C, what we're looking at are types of land uses that you'd expect to operate but not have any undue adverse impact to what you would consider to be appropriate in a residential area or a street. So for this STRA, what we've considered is that you will have a similar number of people who might be in any residential house, and that actually relates to the capped number in the building code. They'd be operating and using the house as any person generally would be just on a limited time frame and basis. They'd be going to and from the house, whether it's in the daytime, afternoon time, evening time, as you would normally expect someone to do. On top of that, to ensure that large gatherings don't happen, there are more strict conditions on the use of the STRA through the management plan, through the booking apps, to not actually allow parties or anything like that. That's a little bit different from what you would have in a resi house, because people don't have those restrictions that apply to them. So in our assessment under Objective C, having people there for a short amount of time is considered appropriate, because the way that they're going to be using the house is how you would expect anyone to ordinarily use a house in any event.
Yeah, that's how I would have, thank you. That's how I would have understood the assessment to be, which to my mind means we should be quite upfront and say, in accordance with Objective C, we consider this to be a non-residential use. But then if you go back to A, we're also saying, but even though it's a non-residential use, it's also, in our view, a type of housing and therefore satisfies Objective A. I suppose my question is, wouldn't it be more correct to say that in relation to A, we don't think this is housing, it doesn't satisfy Objective A, but it does, in our view, satisfy Objective C? Or are you saying it can be both housing and a non-residential use? Are you saying it can be both things and satisfy both parts of the objectives?
Yes, so there are people who do live in this city and have, for whatever reason, needed to have STRA as a backup option, and they have been using it as a housing of their choice or their need at that time. So what we are saying is that it does relate to primarily Objective C, but it is also consistent in some examples with Objective A. Don't know if the acting manager has more to add on that.
Through you, Mayor. So in our local planning scheme number 5, in our zoning table, it sets out use and development classes. So the application being considered is for a change of use to a residential building, and that's a residential use class. So it falls within that broader residential use category set out in our local planning scheme and the planning framework.
Okay, so I'll take your answers as being that you're happy that it can satisfy both Objective A and Objective C. Thank you. Councillor Burns.
Thank you. Just for my absolute clarity, under the scheme text, okay, my reading is this is a use not permitted. Would that be correct? The application is for a use that is currently not permitted. It's a use not permitted. Could you just answer that? Thanks.
Thank you. So it's not an X use, it is an A advertising use, so it's not permitted unless you get approval.
Okay. If I can carry on. So I think I'm going to take that as a yes. Currently, it is a use not permitted, correct? Currently. So what we're going to do, we need a majority with a simple majority of the people in the room. We are going to change the current use to something else, right? And in my mind, where I suppose where I'm going is the decision we'll make will be deciding, not so much, I'm not too concerned about deciding the people that are going to come and go as holiday makers or whatever else, party goers, whatever. But our decision, albeit that we're looking at the applicant, the people that actually affect are the neighbours. So right now, the neighbours, to my mind, and you can tell me anytime I'm wrong, the neighbours live...
What I might do, Councillor Burns, and I think you know where I'm going with this, we want you to ask a question. Okay. We don't want you to advocate for what I think is going to be your alternate next week.
No, not.
Okay.
I just want to check.
Okay, well, now's the opportunity to get any clarifications out through the planning staff.
My question, I just didn't quite get out. Look, yes or no? Right now, is it a use not permitted unless something happens. Yes or no? Use not permitted.
The advice I heard before is that that's not quite the right terminology. It's not permitted unless approved. So if we talk about a use not permitted, that gets a bit confusing. But at the moment, it's not permitted because it hasn't been approved. Isn't that the current state of play? It's an A use.
Thank you. Yes, so the definition is A means that the use is not permitted unless the local government has exercised its discretion by granting approval after giving notice, which is advertising. It's not to be confused with the next use, which is that it's not permitted by the scheme.
Because we decide to. I'm saying right now, as far as the people living next door, to me, it is a use not permitted. However, right, if right now,
I think I understand your question, Councillor Burns, but the scheme talks in terms of a P use or an A use. That's the dichotomy we're dealing with at the moment. So you're talking about a use not permitted, but that's not actually anything you'd find in the zoning table.
If it was a use permitted, we wouldn't be having this conversation because they'd be doing it.
Well, no, we wouldn't. It wouldn't be coming to council for approval.
So it's coming to council because it's not permitted, and we are permitting it.
Well, they're seeking a planning approval.
Yeah, exactly. But for something
because they need an approval,
they need permission, and we have to grant the permission. 4 out of the 7 of us right now in this room would need to say, yeah, it's fine, okay, and then it would be approved. If that's all I'm saying. It's not permitted. The neighbours need to know we're permitting something that's not permitted. I'll leave it at that.
As long as the councillors are aware that we're making a decision on a planning approval, in the absence of which the people can't do what they're proposing, I think everyone's going to be in good stead to make a decision next week. Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Maybe this is what Councillor Burns was getting at, I guess. If we decline to grant this DA, what effect does that have the day after the council meeting? Can they continue operating?
I mean, the answer is no, isn't it, Director? They can't carry out the use that they're seeking approval for. That's why they're seeking approval.
They are operating today.
So, good question. So yes, they can continue operating. However, without they can continue operating with the maximum of 6 people. However, what they're seeking to do is having an approval, depending on which application we're talking about now, either for 8 or 10 people. Now, they can continue operating for 6 people until they stop that use, even when our local planning scheme gets updated and changes with the new regulations, because that essentially permitted use will continue to have effect until they change it. So they can continue operating for 6 people without any management plan or anything like that.
Okay, so both of these, well, I'll lump Darbon in as well. Both of these properties, even if we decline to grant the DA, can continue operating as STRAs. It's just that the DA will grant them permission to have more occupants than they currently have.
Yes.
Was there another question, or did that cover it? I think there was one to my left. Councillor De Vries, did you have another question? Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, thank you for the questions. Just to clarify, is really what we're being asked to do is make an adjudication on a change of land use that comes with a management order. Is that really what the bottom of it is? And that change of use allows commercial operation, as in short stay accommodation.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the crux of it is both these properties are operating as STRAs. They can continue operating as STRAs without any consideration from the city, as they are operating with 6 or less occupants in there. The applications before you while it is a little bit clunky because they're changing to residential building, because our scheme hasn't been updated yet with the tranche of regulation change, the main changes is that there is an increase in people. In one application, it's up to 8 people, and the other application, it's up to 10 people. The officer's recommendation is that that be approved, but then there's certain management plans and conditions which would then run with the land.
Any final questions on C1? Okay, we'll move on to C2, another short-term rental accommodation proposal. This one relates to 19 Darwin Crescent, Subiaco. Councillor Burns.
The briefest of questions, Mayor McMullen. I'd like to know if the officers are aware of a recent police involvement in antisocial behaviour by people renting the property. I'm not across the board in all the details, but I know the police have been involved in some respect. Are the officers aware of this?
Mr. Petrosky.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Not to my knowledge, unless there's more comments from Brendan, if it's come across your desk.
Through you, Mayor, we haven't received any notification from the police in regard to that matter.
Any other questions on C2? Okay, we've probably covered a lot of those in the context of C1. I think we can move on. Thank you, councillors. C3. Climate Change Response Plan endorsement for community consultation. Any questions on C3? Councillor White, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess it'll come up in the debate, but it's great to be able to have this in front of us to talk about. But can I ask about I think I'll begin. On the table on page 29, the target 3 was about consumption reduced by 20% by 2025. And then the suggestion is to change that target so that it's 25% by 2030, which, again, we're not going to debate, but which is great. But I'm just wondering, why have staff decided not to maintain a target of 25% by 2025, whilst then adding, of 20% by 2025, whilst then adding a new target of 25% by 2030? There's a lot of 25s in that.
Are we taking answers from the acting manager or our climate change officer? Okay, Ms. Reedy, thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So we revised this target to 25% because we've currently reduced energy consumption by 18% across natural gas and electricity. So, yeah, we've increased it to increase the ambition. You can justify it either way, but maintaining the 20% would be aiming for a 2% decrease. Yeah, so that was the main justification with that one.
Any other questions? Okay, C4, proposal to amend the level of significance for 260 to 262 Churchill Ave on the local heritage survey. Councillor O'Connor.
Yes, the statement of significance for the building refers to it as a representative example without any kind of qualifier. It's not a good representative example or a fine representative example. Is that something that the city considers in its heritage assessments?
Thank you. Yes, we would normally consider the level of representation that it might have. So there might be a group of buildings that are all of a similar representative style, and there might be a really standout one. Oh, that's quite technical. So unless the acting manager's got any more information, I might take that one on notice to update that as required if need be.
Through you, Mayor. So, I mean, our local planning policy 3.2 provides some guidance on that methodology for arriving at different levels of classification and then looking at examples as well. And yeah, we can provide some further analysis on how that's been arrived at for this particular case.
Any other questions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. If this were to be amended as shown, what changes would it make to any opportunities for development? What additional restrictions might there be on the property owners?
Acting Manager.
Through you, Mayor. So the local heritage survey doesn't have any statutory weight. So in terms of future development opportunities, the city would always be willing to work with an applicant in terms of potential opportunities for the site, but it wouldn't be defined as a heritage protected place because it wouldn't be in a heritage list or in a heritage area. So it's just looking at revising its level on the local heritage survey.
So just to be clear, it wouldn't impose any additional restrictions of any sort?
Through you, Mayor, the short answer is no.
Councillor De Vries.
Just in terms of the level of significance, this is through you, Mayor. This is a question regarding how much of an impact would it have on whether at some point it might go on a heritage list. So is it like a precursor that first you get registered, you've gone from sort of general significance now to good? Just as a curiosity, is that kind of part of the motivation that we're building up a register in order to do that? Or is it because there's an obligation under the Act that we do keep our registers and make sure that they're accurate and so on? Yep.
One for the Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, the local heritage survey comes under our requirements of the Heritage Act.
Did I see another hand up before? Nope. No more questions on C4. Okay, we'll move on. C5. Heritage grant applications. Any questions on C5? Nope. Okay, C6, expression of interest for the old outpatients building at 1909 Subiaco East. Councillor White.
Forgive me if it's here, but I'm just trying to work out what constitutes an expression of interest. Is it just, is the city then presenting a proposal for what the site would be used for, with costs, with other kinds of investments that might be, or not investments necessarily, but yeah, running costs, let's just call it that. So it's more than just saying we're interested and then there'll be a short collection of bidders or proposals to be received, or is this a once-off proposal which is sort of the full deal?
Director Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So that really depends on the nature of the selection criteria that Development WA put in. So they might be seeking to see who might have the capacity to deliver whatever they're seeking to activate that site with, and then they might work with the proponent to refine that proposal. So that's how we would think it would occur. There's a range of options that might be available to that site, depending on stakeholders as well, and that's always subject to future council consideration. What we're saying in this is it's most likely to be that they're looking for the capacity of someone to be able to run the facility, and then they refine the specifics of that into the future.
CEO.
Yeah, perhaps if I could elaborate. I just probably good for to go back to an EBIB on the elected. That's for those that don't know what I'm talking about. Elected members information bulletin. There's quite a bit of information on the 8th of May, and that relates to potential models. So we're providing councillors with some information on what might be, but in terms of the expression of interest, that it would be determined by Development WA. But we have given consideration to what that will do, and then depending upon what, as Alex has pointed out, that they actually ask for, we're well prepared in terms of being able to respond to that.
Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, really simple through you, Mayor McMullen, to Director Petrovski. Just in terms of the time frame, I saw the report, it was excellent. It was great to see how much detail there was. Obviously, we've got a really good case, but you know, we've been talking about it for a while. So how long do you think this process will be? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, we can't speak for Dev WA, but we do think that maybe in the next month or so they would be releasing the EOI, and it'd probably take, give everyone about 4 to 6 weeks. We'd submit, and then hopefully in the next 3 to 4 months there would be a selection made from Dev WA, noting that we still don't know who was successful in the Boiler House EOI that went out some time ago.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, through you, Mayor, and just a general one. Do we know if we got much competition for the... Well, this is...
Mr. Petrovski.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Look, that doesn't really matter. We'll be putting our best foot forward.
Any other questions? Okay, I think that's C6 done. A few tender items now. C7, the tender for the Mueller Park Playground renewal. Okay, C8, the tender for provision of turf renovation services. C9, tender A5782 architect services. Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. I would ask, in raising what the question I have, that if anybody thinks I'm getting close to treading on matters of confidentiality, somebody throws a red flag at me. Okay, so I will speak slowly. All right. My question's this: where the report, it does what it needs to do. It's talking about I call it $3.3 million tendering to the architects that have been selected. There's no mention of the estimated, proposed, whatever project itself. However, I personally find an issue of transparency in that not everybody, actually not a lot of people, but people that are in the industry can extrapolate very easily that amount of architectural fees and the sum it would generally relate to by the nature of the project. So my question is, why there's more confusion, because any individual's calculation could be higher or lower, but it's still out there. And that all being reasonably in the ballpark. Nobody's going to think this is a $3 million project and we're spending $3 million getting the architects to look at it. I'm just being ridiculous. And nobody thinks there's a $1 billion project and we're only spending $3 million. So why, if it's already been reported in the Post that, we're doing this, it's proposed to be done. But why are we not being transparent about something that, as I said, it's probably the wrong word, but something that really is a guesstimate anyway? Why aren't we being transparent when people are going to guess or come pretty down to the wire of what it is? And I have had phone calls on this, people saying, what are you doing?
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Burns.
Thank you.
Look, the recommendation is worded as it is because that's how you would word any recommendation to approve a tender. We're not providing additional detail, which will come in due course and which will be part of the intended consultation processes. But I'll ask CEO Colin Cameron to answer why I suppose we're taking this approach with item C9. But I can assure anyone following the meeting that it's not for a lack of transparency. It's just not how you would write an officer recommendation for a tender, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Council resolved to do a two-step procurement process and got some really good advice as to how we enable elected members to be involved in that process. And in order to do that, so that was from City Lab, a really good procurement expert in terms of construction architectural. This process has been consistent from back on the 13th of December 2022, the report to Council on the 19th of March 24, and the report to Council on the 27th of August, where Council determined to proceed with a two-step process. In order for the jury and the consultative advisory or client advisory group to be able to provide input and do an assessment on which is the best architectural firm, it needed to provide information, which we did. And that's been consistent with the reports that we've gone through right during that time. There's obviously a build cost in that estimate for them to be able to produce something. And there is obviously a project budget beyond that because we're talking about the whole civic precinct. So, however, what was really crystal clear in our advice from City Lab was in this two-step process, this is the way in which you can choose the best architectural firm that can respond to a brief. But ultimately, it is up to Council to determine finally what that scope is in terms of both the build cost and the total project cost. And that will happen down the track. So the idea is select the architect. There is a price for that. And that price is fixed unless, it takes a lot longer and those sorts of things. But that ultimately, once that architect is selected, they're then in a position to have a conversation with the elected members and staff and determine what that final scope is and do a verification on a concept that may or may not be the concept that they actually won that process with. So included in that, our procurement expert also gave other really good examples whereby, for example, there was a change of government, and we have elections every 2 years, and where a scope was dramatically changed, in fact halved. But those architects still proceeded to deliver the project. So the reason why at this stage we haven't come out and said this is what we provided them is because it was just the means, pretty good means to sort of understand it, for them to be able to undertake this two-stage process. So, but ultimately, Council in the future will determine what the project budget is and what the build cost should be once we go to tender. But that's a fair way away. So yes, you can extrapolate. It's pretty consistent. If you go back to 2022 and you would extrapolate increase in build costs, hasn't changed that much from that report. But that's the information in terms we need to actually provide them something by which they could go through the two-stage process, including creating a concept. So at the time that Council determines what the budget is and the project budget for the greater civic precinct, that will be the time at which we can advise, and I imagine that will be somewhere during the community consultation phase. But this is purely just to select the best architectural firm.
Follow up, Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Look, I appreciate that, okay, and everything you've said is clear. But if I hone down on the fact there's a number out there, okay, and you just said it might end up, as you used that government example, half the number. And just as easily I could say it could end up being twice the number. So the number itself becomes almost irrelevant, right? So if it is, and it's explained as this is kind of where we are, right? But arguably it could be a lot less and arguably it could be a lot more, but we're still being transparent because we're not saying this is the number, this is the number how we're working to. I don't even know that it needs answering. It's a question that I'm pondering because I don't feel transparent. Is my problem. And you can't make me feel transparent, I suppose. But you could, please, by all means, comment, CEO.
Yeah, I'll try through the chair, and perhaps either Emma or Joel might want to pick up on it. But the transparency relates to, we've got a contract to select an architect, and that's going to be the price, unless there is some variation by which council determined to make this longer or shorter, etc., etc. But that's the price. So that's the transparency, because all we are doing at the moment, all council are considering, is appointing an architect. The actual project build and all that sort of stuff will come later, particularly once you've had an opportunity to talk to the architectural firm and their whole people, and they better understand what's the expectation. Because at the moment, they're just going by information that was written on a page. As good as that information was, clearly, the people that actually prepared the information considered that quite differently, all three firms. So it's really important the selected architect have a conversation, and that will form part of what the project budget is and what the build is likely to be.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions on C9? Councillor White.
Maybe just a slight clarification on that. And, I think the process that's gone through has been very rigorous and very useful. But price was, often in tenders you're choosing the lowest price. Well, you're not always choosing the lowest price, you're choosing the best value for money. But value for money doesn't feature in the criteria that was used for this. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. So the assessment was done based in the two-step process by the jury, and also information was provided by the three elected members that were on that advisory group. They made the determination based on the best architectural firm, and that was unanimous. And then they opened the envelope relating to what that price would be, and that was within our expectations.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, and through you, Mayor. What are we getting for our 3.25 million? Can we be a bit more precise about, because that would seem to be a lot just for a plan.
CEO.
Yeah, the information about the next stages, etc., has been provided through a range of workshops in addition of EMIBs. But essentially, we've also written out a potential timeline related to concept verification, how many weeks that's likely to take. So it could take more than that time, it could take less than that time, but essentially all the components of that have been provided to you. But what it would do is that, assuming council are able to land on a specific scope of work and take that out to tender, this would take us right through to the completion of the project.
When does the community become involved and get a say in this?
Yeah, so if I could, through the chair, one of the things we've been pretty consistent with right back since 2022 is around the most important thing for elected members is to be able to have a conversation with the architects, and you've now, if you select them, then you'll be in a position, the contract will be signed and they'll meet with you and with staff. That's where that conversation will be really rich in terms of developing or verifying the concept, because what they might have produced may not be what council wants. So when we go through that process of concept verification, the firms will be able to give you good information as to when and what time and for what types of questions, etc., the community consultation. So that's an open dialogue with the architect around timing, around the questions that are really important to us as a community. We've got a lot of great community that understand that site really, really well. So, it's an important part. But if you look at each of the reports that have come to council, really important, get an architect, have a conversation, and then work out what the best consultation process is to get the rich information that we know our community have.
What I would have done if answering the question would have also been to refer to that council resolution early in 2024, at which time council resolved that there will be community consultation after we appoint an architect. And I suppose the thing to remember is that we're only just getting to the point now of appointing an architectural firm. So We're sticking to the plan. If you cast your mind back to early 2024, and we don't know exact timeframes, but the next step will be to start thinking about community consultation. Follow-up question, Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, thank you. You did mention, if it didn't work out, is there any way that we, if it doesn't work out, is there any way we can recover any of that $3 million?
Through the chair. Clearly, there's sort of gateways by which you don't just hand over a cheque for that amount of money. You go through a process, and if there was a point in time where ourselves or the firm didn't wish to work with us, or we didn't wish to work with them because it wasn't progressing in the way we considered, then we would be able to have conversations in relation to that. But that's contained within the terms of the contract as to how you would provide notice, etc., that you wish to sort of either stop this process or whatever. So, as I said, council elections every 2 years as well, but also various things can change. But ultimately, there would be a contract in place with the expectation that council will proceed for a redevelopment of 241 within the civic precinct.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen, and thank you, CEO, for those comments. Look, in light of Councillor Powell's question, and also in light of the Local Government Act and our right to see any document, be it unsigned or signed, can we receive a copy of the draft before voting on this? Can we have a copy of the draft contract that is intended to be executed? There must be a draft. Can we get that? So can we read our agreement, which I gather would satisfy Councillor Powell's questions, how you get in, how you get out? Is that fine?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions on C9? Okay. C10, financial statements and reports for the month ending 30 April 2025. Any questions on C10, councillors? Hang on, do we have the report for that yet? It's not flagged. Oh, there it is. C10. Nope. Okay. Councillors, next week there will be several confidential items, but we won't be discussing those at this agenda briefing. Therefore, I declare the agenda briefing closed at 6:58 p.m. Thank you, councillors, for all the questions, and thank you, staff, for your advice.